Hello, welcome back to Hendrix Dota. I'm doing today my 7.36b offlane tier list. I've collected this tier list, the data for it, namely off of websites, two websites really, Spectral Stats and then also Dota Buff, which are both excellent websites for gathering data about hero statistics, both in competitive games, and also Dota Buff is, of course, excellent for gathering data about pub games as well. I've also used Strats a little bit, which is a great website. So today I'm going to present the tier list that I've kind of come to based on these two websites. This tier list is designed more for competitive play as opposed to pub play. So, I'm of the persuasion that if you're going to be playing pubs, really you can kind of master and spam just a few characters, and that's kind of the best bet. So it's not going to necessarily, have a one-to-one correlation with this. So I'll kind of go from, I guess, the F tier up, and then we'll do the honorable mentions kind of at the end. So Broodmother is, you have to pardon my language, but complete dog shit. They did increase the heal interval on her new passive, I believe the Spider's Milk, so it does heal her somewhat quickly. The problem is that she gets, for those of you who don't know, when she kills a unit, she heals a little bit. The problem is that this healing is, if I recollect correctly, it's reduced on minions and it's very little healing. So this doesn't offset the fact that Broodmother lost her regen from her web ability. And the fact that she no longer has a ranged harass. In the past, she used to have Silken Bola. This has been replaced by the, I believe it's called Incapacitating Bite or something like that, which is actually not a bad spell. I think Broodmother does have some potential, but I think it's a little bit more as a mid laner. She has a very nice mid-game power spike if you can get there, but the problem with Broodmother as an off-laner is that you're 2v2 and you're purely melee with very lackluster sustain, so you just get harassed and killed. And also in offlane and competitive, you might want to abandon your offlaner to go through the gates and make a gank or something. So oftentimes the offlaner is left to their own devices. Broodmother can of course farm post 6 pretty easily, but pre-level 6, if she gets behind, it's essentially game over, because she's a high-tempo character that wants to get a lot of stuff done and get a lot of kills. So she basically just fucking sucks. There's very little data about her in competitive because very few people have touched her, but the few games that she has been in, she's performed terribly, and her win rate in general reflects this. I do think she has kind of one silver lining, again more as a mid laner, of that her Bloodthorn power spike is really devastating, and her, in my estimation, her facet where her Q, which grants her bonus attack damage and lifesteal, applies to all her summons. I think that gives Broodmother a very nice pushing ability, combined with her Incapacitating Bite. It gives enemies mischance, which is really nice. Broodmother, with her level 25 talent for Incapacitating Bite, essentially when she auto-attacks an enemy, she has effectively 90% evasion. So she's interesting in that she actually has kind of a nice late-game timing, but it's a bit weird. Not great as an offlaner. She has no crowd control. She's just very bad. Before I go on to the other characters, because speaking about her made me realize this, I kind of want to break down my general estimation of what offlane is about nowadays in competitive. It's an offlaner's main facets that they need to do, not facets in the game itself, as a semantic term. They need to be durable. They need to be able to initiate fights. They need to have some scaling damage, and they need to have a combination of being okay if they're behind, whilst also scaling with items. So a character, when I get to it, I'll be able to explain why Centaur matches that. So a character like Broodmother that has no crowd control, is not good when behind, doesn't have an initiation, is not going to perform very well. Alchemist, when they first added in the facets, I was very excited for Alchemist because he got a facet where he gains 250 starting gold at the beginning of the game, which I was hoping would be very impactful because he could potentially get an earlier Vanguard or Radiance, and items like Vanguard or Radiance are timing-based items because they have a flat effect, which means earlier you get them, the more powerful they are. So I had some hope for Alchemist at the beginning of this patch, but it doesn't seem that he's performing particularly well in the offlane. He's performing a little bit better as a safe laner, but not very good. I think also the meta is a bit slow for Alchemist. It's very easy to go high ground and defend your positions. So Alchemist kind of suffers a little bit. And again, the offlane, as I discussed earlier, you need an offlaner that can have some flexibility in terms of like being behind, and Alchemist needs to obviously like play from ahead. So he's not great at the moment. Magnus, they don't really seem to know what they're doing with this character. His passive ability, where he gives his enemies, he has reduced knockback amplification, is very strange. I'm not sure what their idea with that is. His reverse polarity is obviously a joke. The other facet, where I believe he gains bonus, I don't recollect, skewer damage, is, I think, okay, but not very impactful. Magnus is always going to be a character that's going to have kind of a lower win rate in pubs because he's a skill-based character that has to flank abilities, hit big CCs, kind of similar to like Tidehunter, and he's difficult to play. But currently Magnus as an offlaner is just a bit too squishy. It doesn't really offer enough meat, so to speak. If he gets behind, Magnus can recover the game by initiating, but I think nowadays with everybody having all these new facets and passive abilities that give them bonus combat stats, something like an axe where he just gains like free bonus strength, Magnus just kind of falls short, unfortunately. Lycan's another one where I'm not sure what they're trying to do with this character. He has the Spectral Wolves facet, which is completely silly as to why you'd ever take that, because with that one, if you don't know, you don't really have wolves as summons anymore, and when you hit the wolf ability, you just gain some bonus stats, which is completely pointless. The whole point of playing Lycan is to have an aura and to push turrets and stuff with the wolf, so he kind of has one facet that's completely useless. His passive, which I believe is bonus damage to neutrals, is kind of underwhelming because Lycan already does like a lot of damage to neutrals. So he's sort of this weird timing-based character where, you know, he wants to play aggressive and push turrets, but if he ever really gets behind, it's very difficult to do anything. And again, if you're running a Lycan as your offlaner, you're lacking in initiation, because Lycan doesn't have any initiation. He's not a blink stunner. So it puts teams in a very awkward position. What I would say about Lycan is that his ultimate and his scepter are both very powerful. So if it gets to late game and Lycan's able to build some stat items, he actually is a fairly good late game sort of secondary carry, but it's very awkward playing a character, again, that has, you know, no initiation and whatnot. And I find Lycan's lane phase nowadays to be very bad. His regeneration passive ability, which you typically either want to max second or dual max with the wolves, is just kind of a weak spell. And Lycan, very similar to Broodmother, since he doesn't really have any range, he just kind of gets harassed out and killed. Once you get to level 6, you can make some stuff happen with this guy, but in competitive, the enemies are going to be more cognizant of the fact that your ultimate gives you really high kill threat. So Lycan just doesn't cut it against, I think, more knowledgeable opponents. Lone Druid has been gutted into the ground since his prominence last year. There's been some attempts made in the latter letter patches to revive him, but Lone Druid is pretty junk. You know, he's a snowball-based character, but he you know, no initiation, really. He's kind of all dependent on winning that lane phase and aggressively pushing turrets, but the problem with him is that you can essentially just jump on his head and kill the Druid hero with any sort of gap close or like burst magic damage. And the Spirit Bearer's movement speed has just been nerfed. I think it's been nerfed like 40 movement at level 1. The character's just in a very bad spot. Not even lone Druid players are playing him. He's quite bad. Bristleback has he has kind of unfortunately like a lack of a decision with the facets. You have one facet which makes you not do damage with your Bristleback passive ability. Instead you shoot your goo on them, which is kind of useless. And then he has another one where he gains attack speed instead of attack damage, which I don't even really know if he wants that. So Bristleback is just kind of not too happy with the facet changes. You know, he's an offlaner with, again, no crowd control. Yes, in this day and age, with games going longer and with the capacity to stall games, having a carry as an offlaner is not terrible. But the problem with Bristleback is that he's not actually very good late game because enemies will build a Silver Edge or they'll get scepter upgrades that might have breaks or talents that might have breaks. And once you break this character, he just dies instantly. So he's not very good at the moment. Omni Knight, I was of the estimation in 7.35 that Omni Knight was better than people had believed. I think he was, if he was capable of building something like a Radiance to enable him to farm, I actually kind of felt that with his past shard, where he got 2 Blessed Hammers, I kind of thought that he actually scaled okay as like a carry. That was something I was going to talk about before the 7.36b, or excuse me, the 7.36 patch came out. They of course removed his secondary Blessed Hammer shard, and they nerfed him even harder by making his Blessed Hammer now similar to like Doom's E, where it's like an auto-cast melee attack that costs mana. So Omni Knight has no harassed lane anymore, because he used to be able to at least throw his Blessed Hammers at you, you know, to poke you. He doesn't have that any longer. And he has less damage in the mid to late game. So this character just kind of sucks at the moment. His facets are both okay. I think his Degen Aura facet, where he does more damage the longer you're in the aura, is arguably better. But with a character that has no initiation, and who doesn't have like an exceptional lane phase, it's very difficult to justify picking this hero at the moment. I think if he's playable, he's maybe better as a carry, because I do think that the Degen Aura facet combined with something like a Radiance, or just you naturally building a lot of strength and attack damage, makes more sense, but it's not really worth it to try to learn that or play it. In D tier, the D tier, F tier characters, by the way, characters are not playable. The D tier characters are characters that are playable in these situations, but are just not good. Viper, I think, is better as a mid laner. Obviously, his break nowadays is stronger than it ever has been, because there's so many passes for him to disable, but the problem with Viper as an offlaner is that he has very limited sustain, because he burns through mana very fast, and he's very squishy innately, actually. Viper does not have good base stats whatsoever. He has very poor base attack damage and health. So traditionally, this character likes to be mid lane because I can sort of duel you, I can beat you in a 1v1, I can get a bottle, I can heal with the runes, and I can extend my my strength and my dominion over you. In a 2v2, again, Viper's whole kit is essentially single target damage with his ultimate and with his Q. His W and his E don't do very much damage. Or at least his W, you can typically have the smarts to get out of it. So Viper in the off lane just completely suffers, and the Lotuses are not enough to sustain him. So what I tend to see happen with Viper in the off lane is that he actually just loses early game and never really recovers. And again, he's an offlaner with no... The trend here amongst all these offlaners I've talked about besides Magnus is he doesn't really have any hard CC, so it's very difficult for Viper to get back into the game when he gets behind. He does have, obviously, the level 25 talent timing, where he becomes universal and he gains about 200 attack damage. So Viper does scale into the ultra late game well, but as an offlaner, he gets behind very quickly and he never really is able to dig himself out of the hole. As a mid laner, if he's able to get a better lane phase, get to that level 6 timing faster, because you'll have more levels mid, he can do ulti ganks or ulti the mid laner and force him to teleport away. He has much more room to breathe mid lane and to gain that advantage. So as a mid laner, I'd say he's C or B. As an off laner, he's not very good. Pudge, nowadays, I'm going to take a sip of some coffee here. Pudge, nowadays, is, I think, better as a carry. That's certainly what the data suggests, and that's certainly what pros are picking him for. He has excellent carry items with things like, Shiva's, Kaisanj, Eternal Shroud, though Eternal Shroud has been nerfed. His Scepter. So, Pudge is a little bit better as a carry nowadays than as an offlaner. He kind of wants to also... Well, I guess the reason I put Pudge in this position as opposed to something lower is I think that Pudge is a little bit more untested. I do think that he does make sense as an offlaner conceptually, because with a Blink Dagger he has great initiation. It's also BKB piercing initiation. Both his hook and his ultimate pierce BKB, as I'm probably, you're aware. So I think Pudge conceptually makes sense as an offlaner. I'm just putting him down here because it doesn't seem that teams conceive of him in that manner. But I do think the character has potential. I might even, you know, if I had done this tier list again, I might even put him in honorable mentions, because Pudge is actually quite a good hero at the moment. Beastmaster. Beastmaster is, I think, kind of unproven. Well, no, he's been played a decent amount, and he hasn't had very much success. It's been a rough time for Beastmaster, really, for, it feels like, the past year or so, where the games have slowed down a lot, so it's difficult for Beastmaster to, like, kind of snowball and win the game early. Obviously, he's a pushing summon-based hero, and traditionally in Dota, summon-based heroes kind of are all about winning the early game and taking turrets. It's kind of difficult for, in the modern game, to close out games quickly enough if you're a summon-based hero. I think Beastmaster has that problem. I think he's a little bit better than other ones, like Visage. I didn't even put on the list because there's just no data for Visage. No one's playing this character. And liking it because he does have some utility. He also has some hybrid damage. He has, you know, his aura. The facet that I prefer of his is the Beast Mode facet, where you activate it. You gain some attack speed, and when you auto-attack, you apply your Axe's damage amplification debuff to enemies. I think that is pretty good. So I think Beastmaster could, because he does have some utility, and he does have some hybrid damage with his Scepter and with his ulti. He's playable, but again, the games I think go too long. Like eventually, Beastmaster, all he really does is provide a stun. So there's just better picks. Spirit Breaker, it seems to me that they've kind of wanted to remove Spirit Breaker from being a core. They've reduced his farming speed by nerfing his greater bash damage to minions. In the past, it used to be that Spirit Breaker could simply, you know, WQ and insta-clear a wave. Now he has a little more difficulty farming. But he's better on low econ. They've changed his Q to, by default, break debuff immunity. So it seems to me that they're trying to push Spirit Breaker to be a support, and most pros have taken to him as a support, and I think his stats are like average. As an offlaner, he gets harassed very hard in lane, and he gets behind typically. He doesn't scale quite as well as he used to, but it's still Spirit Breaker. He still obviously has a BKB piercing. He has 3 BKB piercing CCs, honestly, if you count the Q, E, and ultimate as all separate CC instances. And his knockback amplification with his ulti can be, with the facet that he has, can be very funny. You can displace people very far. So there's some potential with this character, but he operates a little bit better on low econ. Sand King is a very sad story. Sand King, I think, prior to the B patch, was arguably the best. I would actually say the best mid laner in Dota, truthfully, though he didn't have too much exposure as that, and one of the best offlaners. His Dust Devil facet was exceptional in terms of being able to control a fight, because the historic problem with Sand King is that you put the W down, enemies reveal you, you run out of the W to escape, and your W disappears. Well, the Dust Devil fixed that by having the W travel with you, so Sand King had a lot of sort of sustained threat in the fights. They've nerfed the radius on Dust Devil. They've also made it where Dust Devil doesn't automatically jump to you when you Q. So it used to be that you could turn on your W, you could blink and Q onto an enemy, and your Dust Devil would instantly appear on you. And then if you had Scepter, you could stun lock them. So Sand King, I would have said again, was really one of the best heroes of last patch in offlane, mid lane, and maybe even carry. He was very good. Now he's been nerfed quite considerably, sadly. It seems that Valve doesn't really like Sand King. There are balance issues with him because he tends to do so well in lower levels of play, but it's quite sad to me. Now the problem with Sand King as an offlaner is he wants to take the Dust Devil facet, but he has a very poor early game because he doesn't have any defense, and then his mid to late game payoff with the Dust Devil facet isn't as good as before because it's the radius on it, the interval of the spikes has been nerfed. Again, it doesn't follow you when you Q, so it's unfortunate. He's not particularly good now. Batrider's a somewhat okay hero. He always has abysmal stats when it pertains to his win rate in pubs. I see a lot of other people who make content about Dota typically will put Batrider very low. The fact of the matter is Batrider will always have a low win rate in pubs because the character is difficult. In offlane, the situation is that Batrider can power farm very quickly, which makes you think that, oh, he's a good offlaner, but he doesn't really scale very well with gold. He's kind of better as a 4 because he can farm at something like he can have 150 CS by 30 minutes, even as like a 4, and then he can build utility items for his team. As an offlaner, he's kind of lacking a little bit, and I would say like the damage / tankiness department, which is why his win rate as an offlaner reflects that. Though he does have excellent initiation, so I can't put him too low. Next we have Doom. Doom, it feels very weird to me to put Doom this low on the tier list, because this is obviously a hero that has a fantastic kit with a point-and-click silence / mute / break that prevents enemy healing. It feels weird to put him so low, but Doom has been pretty nerfed over the past year. The stats on basically all of his abilities have been nerfed. His W's been nerfed into the ground. His E's been nerfed a bunch. His ultimate's been nerfed a bunch. Neither of his facets are very good. They did just buff his passive ability where he does more auto attack damage to lower level enemies, but Doom doesn't, unless you take the Alpha Wolf creep, which grants you critical strike. I don't see how that matters very much because Doom is mostly, ability damage, but the character, despite all these problems, does still have a very solid amount of utility, and his stats in competitive are about average, which is why I placed him about average. He still has the ultimate, which is going to be good against any hero in Dota that either isn't Medusa or isn't an illusion-based carry. Every other carry in Dota, you put the ultimate on them, it's very impactful. He still has percentage health damage, which is excellent. He still builds the classic items that you'd like him to build, like Shiva's Guard, Blink Dagger, BKB, Scepter. So the character is not terrible, just his numbers have been reduced to a point to where you need to make sure to basically not blind Doom, because Doom is so bad, he's so kind of innately weak that you need to make sure that there's an enemy carry that you can disable with the ultimate. Something like a Life Stealer, that you can ult them and the game is like ruined for them. That's really your goal with Doom. Dragon Knight is a decent hero at the moment. He's a little bit better as either a mid laner or a carry. Most people, I believe, take the Corrosive Breath ability, which will reduce enemy armor and do bonus damage to turrets. As an offlaner, Dragon Knight kind of wants to play with like a tempo advantage, so offlane he can kind of get, even though he can like survive a lot of poke and stuff as an offlaner, if you're going to be like abandoning him, that's not great. Dragon Knight wants to be playing the game with like an advantage because he wants to be using his ultimate on cooldowns and taking towers, and he wants to buy kind of greedy items like, Blink Dagger, BKB, Scepter. And offlaner, you want them to instead buy a lot of the times. But BKB, Blink's fine, but they might have less gold, so they need to be effective on a lower level of economy. And Dragon Knight, he really only has the W stun, he doesn't have any other utility. He does have the Q bonus, he does have the Q damage reduction, but its usefulness is kind of limited because enemies can get dispels pretty early into the game. So Dragon Knight's just kind of better as a mid laner. Plus, as a mid laner, he can get solo levels, and his passive, Dragon's Blood, which you don't level, it scales up with, you don't manually level it, but it scales up with player levels, the Dragon's Blood passive. So it means that Dragon Knight wants to get solo levels under his belt to kind of get tankier and push towers and play the game aggressively. The Tidehunter has kind of poor stats across the board. I kind of view Tidehunter in similar like to Magnus, where he's a utility-based character who he's not really solo taking games over on his own. He's instead providing utility to his team, which is why his pub win rate tends to be kind of low. Because he's not, if a Smurf is playing Tidehunter, they're not going to be killing everybody like if they were playing Meepo or something. So that's why Tidehunter's win rate historically is kind of lower. In competitive, his stats are just kind of average. I think he's a very good, just kind of generic offlaner if you need some utility. He's good against illusion heroes because of his E and his, which reduces attack damage and his damage block. He's kind of bad against a lot of the, like, anti-tank heroes, like Life Stealer and stuff. So, and BKB is obviously an item people buy a lot, so the ultimate, it gets countered quite a bit. Tidehunter overall is kind of where I used to put something like a Pudge, where he's a skill-based character. You have to find the Blink ulti initiations to make the character work. Nowadays, he does have the Anchor, which is nice, but yeah, overall, that's just the problem with him. And I think definitely his facet where he gains Anchor Smash block is better than the one where he like starts the game off with less attack range and stuff, because the Anchor Smash block one scales better anyways than that. Night Stalker's interesting because Night Stalker has very good win rate in pubs, but kind of poor win rates in competitive, so I kind of put him right in the middle. I think it's because Night Stalker is kind of like a greedy, aggressive character who wants to like pick off supports by himself and stuff. He's not very good one behind. I do think he's not terrible because with his scepter he can like permanently silence his opponents. But I'm not been particularly impressed by Night Stalker in competitive when I've seen him. It's kind of been mixed results. So this is when we'll have to kind of hold out and see. Ogre Magi is just received a buff to his multicast chance. I think Ogre Magi is another kind of potentially untested character that I do think has some potential. He has a pretty good lane phase. He has excellent base stats. The other thing about offlaners have kind of like a later timing. So if you want to think about it this way, you know, your supports like your 4 and 5, their timing is like pre 10 minutes in the game. A character like a Lich or Crystal Maiden, that's when they're going to be the most powerful. A mid laner's timing is like maybe 15 minutes or so. Something like a Queen of Pain where they want to get their ultimate and get their abilities maxed out and start killing everybody. A carry's timer is like late game, like 30 minutes in the game or something. And an offlaner's time, though this varies, might be something like, 20 minutes. So Ogre Magi fits this timing very well because he builds Hand of Midas. And because of his multicast chance, he gets like a bunch of bonus gold very quickly. So Ogre Magi, develops into having a really powerful, like, 20-25 minute timing, where he can, like, one-shot people really easily and stuff. And he scales pretty well, too, because he has very good level 25 talents with his, Fire Blast damage and Fire Blast chance on attack. I guess the issue with Ogre Magi is that his Q innately has a low cast range, and it only targets one person. So I can play Centaur, or I can stun multiple people, or I can play Ogre Magi and only stun one. So I think that's the issue with Ogre, is the utility's kind of lacking. But the thing that I think is a saving grace about him is that with Scepter, I can stun lock an opponent for a very long time. So he's an excellent, support killer. When I get Scepter, I can blink, use Q Scepter on a support, like a one-tap them, while also being tanky, while also pushing towers very well with my E. So we'll have to see. I think Ogre Magi has some potential. Razor is, in my estimation, one of the most OP heroes of Dota at the moment. I totally despise this character. As an offlaner, though, he is susceptible to getting focused down in the lane phase and killed. This is why Razor tends to be played mid lane nowadays, because mid lane is kind of safer. So he can kind of get some room to breathe and duel his opponent, because he's kind of an excellent duelist if you think about it, with Static Link and his ultimate. Offlane, he can get harassed, he can get kind of behind in levels, and if he gets behind in levels, it's very difficult for him to recover. The other thing about Razor is that one of the prerequisites I mentioned for offlane is that you want to be durable. Razor only really gains his durability by draining his opponent's attack damage. So if he's facing multiple enemies, he's not particularly very durable. And he also gets his durability from items. He doesn't have it innately. So once his BKB wears off, he's pretty squishy. So Razor makes more sense as like a mid laner or a carry that is kind of more on the damage side of things. I think his win rate reflects this. His win rate offlane is not great, but his win rate mid and carry I think is better. Plus, obviously, again, I could go into it 50 times. He doesn't have any initiation, really. Underlord is a character that's had a little bit more play, and he has an okay pub win rate. Underlord kind of typically has an okay pub win rate, though, because he's very simple to play. You just kind of farm waves with your Q, and you have very, very good base stats, and you have a very powerful passive ability with your Atrophy Aura. Underlord's a nice complement if you have a team comp that already scales well, because what Underlord does is he just farms, and he stalls the game out. And he just sort of passively scales very well with the enemies, because his Q scales with enemy health. And once he gets his I believe his Aghanim Shard, which increases the how how many times his Q does damage, and he can center it on himself. He becomes a very powerful, like, secondary carry. And again, his atrophy aura will scale with the enemy's attack damage. So Underlord's like a nice kind of complement, again, if you just want to stall games out, kind of go the distance, and just have an offlaner who just like builds auras, and is useful that way. But he doesn't offer very good initiation. I mean, his ultimate, in theory, sounds nice, but you could just teleport in with like teleport boots or with like a town portal scroll. So the ultimate's like, you know, not as good a lot of the times. People are experimenting now with the ultimate facet that kind of gives you, it gives you like Necronomicon warriors, so it gives you like a little bit of scrapping power early. So Underlord is just kind of like an average, underwhelming but safe pick that you can do, and he's not bad. Brewmaster's a very solid hero, obviously, basically, you know, blindable essentially. With his 4 stances, he has defense against auto attackers, against magic damage. He has bonus damage himself with the fire stance. He has status resistance. He has magic damage. He has physical damage. Obviously, with his Brewlings, he has tons of CC. He's very difficult to kill because he simply ults and runs away. Brewmaster, the only caveat is he doesn't start fights very well because he's not like a blink stunner. You need some other form of initiation on your team if you're going to have a Brewmaster. So that's the reason he's not like an A tier. But in terms of what I would kind of call like follow-up CC, Brewmaster's like the best in Dota. Because with my Earth Brewling Stun, my Cloud Brewling Tornado, and then my Void Brewling Pullback, I have just incredible displacement on this hero. So this guy's just a very solid, you can pick it every game and it's going to be good if you're like a competitive team. I'm going to kind of lump Legion Commander and Axe together. These characters were obviously very powerful in the last 2 patches, but they've been nerfed, and now they're just kind of decent heroes. Legion Commander has a very powerful lane phase, because you can do the Q shield facet, and you can just simply run at enemies level 1 with your retaliation attack with lifesteal, and just kind of push them back, and by the time you get your Q maxed out, you have a very powerful timing where it's like very difficult for enemies to fight you. But Legion Commander does need to like snowball, and she does need to have a team comp that preferably doesn't have like illusions in it or something, where she can like duel the enemy carry and kill them. Or she needs to, it's better after describe that she needs to have a team comp that's excellent at skirmishing, so she needs to be paired with something like a Skywrath, where she can like run around, you know, blink ult somebody and then have like a support who can follow up with like the nuking damage on them. So she's not going to be very good in like a traditional team fight unless she has like a bunch of bonus kills. So that's why she's B tier, and her stats are about average actually nowadays. Axe is not exactly the same, but he's similar. You know, he has a okay lane phase. He cuts waves very well. He farms very fast. He plays the game at a fast pace. He has pretty good initiation with Blink Berserker's Call. You know, the problem with Axe is that if the enemies don't have either illusions or a bunch of fast auto-attacking characters, his damage is very heavily reduced. So Axe, like Legion, is kind of more situational now. He's not just like, you pick him and you win. But in the right game, Axe is obviously very devastating. This is going to be my surprise kind of fun mention, which is Clockwork. I don't really necessarily know if Clockwork belongs up here. I put him up here. He's more untested, but I just kind of wanted to... This is my estimation of how strong I really think he is if he's played correctly. Clockwork has, I think, he has 2 very good facets. The first facet is Power Clog Increased Radius, which can let you either run away with great ease, because it can block off more enemies, or trap more opponents, which is great. He also has Reduced Cooldown Hookshot if he hits an ally, which is wonderful if you make a mistake, and you know, you'll get the hookshot back in like 10 seconds or something. And it also gives a physical damage barrier, which is fantastic, gives you a little bit of defense. And then Clockwork's passive is very good, because he gets, I believe, 0.3% bonus damage per armor, and that's all damage. Ability auto attack. So Clockwork can build items he already likes to build, like Shiva's or Lotus Orb or Crimson Guard, and all of a sudden he's doing, you know, incredible damage while also being very tanky. The problem with Clockwork as like a core in the past, because I had experimented in the past with Clockwork mid and offlane, is that he didn't really scale very well. Like once the enemies got magic resistance, he was kind of worse. But with Eternal Shroud being nerfed and with him getting this new special ability where he gains bonus damage per armor, he actually scales pretty well as a core. With his scepter, he has very low cooldowns on his abilities. He has BKB Piercing Sun. So I think this character actually has a lot of potential as an offlaner. He has an excellent early game as well, where he can. This is why he's playing this as a support, because he can run you down with his Q1. So I really think try Clockwork offlane, and let me know what you think about it. I think it's a really solid pick at the moment, actually. And by the way, his competitive stats as a support are pretty good, which leads me to believe that the character's solid. Wind Ranger doesn't have the most exposure, but she has excellent stats when she is played. The character is just generally, quite good at the moment, and has been for a while. You ult somebody with Maelstrom and they die. That's basically it. And she's very innately tanky just with her E. She gets her Scepter, which also gives her invisibility with it, so she becomes even harder to deal with. She has a very long stun with her Q. She has a slow with her W and poke. She kind of just does everything, for you. The only thing is she doesn't have, crazy crowd control. It's more like single target, stun somebody for a few seconds and then maybe hit them with a Gleipnir root. But that's oftentimes enough to kill someone. So the character is generally pretty solid across the board. Getting into the A tiers, we have Darkseer. Darkseer has excellent stats, both in pubs and in competitive. The character has a very... I like the facet where he gains attack speed for intelligence, and it combines well with his passive ability, where his intelligence can't be lower than his strength or agi. So what you can do on Darkseer is basically just build him as a strength hero with harder to rask or whatever other strength items, and then you gain a bunch of int and attack speed. So the character plays the game at a very fast tempo by farming with Ion Shell. He can jungle and play by himself. If his support leaves him, he's totally fine doing that. He has a great combination of he can initiate well by hasting himself. He can help allies initiate by hasting them. He can farm multiple lanes at once with his Ion Shell, farm jungle camps. He always has the top net worth of 10 to 15 minutes, it feels like, no matter what happened. Now he actually scales somewhat well with the intelligence and basically the bonus int he gets. And then his Wall of Replica basically is always going to be good in any game. I mean, it's better against Delusion heroes because it reveals which one is the real character. But the Wall of Replica is always a good ability. So, and then his Scepter is always good. This character is just generally very solid. Mars has historically abysmal pub stats because the character is difficult. But he tends to have very good competitive stats. It's not difficult to see why. The character has high magic damage and physical damage, so hybrid, which is nice. He, blink ults you, Qs you. He locks out the whole enemy team. He stuns them. He's just a very solid character. He has the facet where he heals a bunch inside of Arena of Blood, which I think was just buffed, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it was nerfed, I don't recall. But it's still very good. And it's no surprise that this character feels like it's played every game in the current tournaments we have. So, Slardar is another excellent character at the moment. He has, kind of a so-so lane phase pre-6, but once he gets to level 6, he just starts running enemies down with his ult and his Q. He has BKB Piercing Stun, especially ranged int supports that have low armor and health. It just feels like Slardar one-shots them. The current build people are doing a lot of is Blink Dagger Soul Ring, and they're just basically Blink Dagger Soul Ring Shard, and they're just using their W to farm waves. They always have good mana. They're always zooming around at really high movement speed. They're blinking on enemies, ulting them, one-shotting the supports, also scaling well into the late game, because Slardar does scale innately well. After all, he has a BKB Piercing Stun, and his ultimate reduces up to 20 armor or something, so the character also has an excellent Scepter. That's another thing people are going for, which gives you a bunch of bonus stats in the puddle. It increases the puddle radius on the W. The character just is off the scales in terms of every metric. He's playable as a mid laner. He's seen some play as that. I even believe he's playable as a carry if you do Mask of Madness and capitalize on the ease bonus damage to creeps. This character is wonderful at the moment. In S tier we have Centaur. Now Centaur doesn't have the most OP stats of any of these characters, but the reason for that is sort of a phenomenon I've encountered both analyzing stats for Dota and also League of Legends, which is that characters that have really high pick rates a lot of times and get like blinded all the time, they'll tend to have a slightly lower win rate because they're maybe not picked appropriately. In reality, Centaur, despite the fact that his win rate is just like 50%, he's picked in, again, it feels like every competitive game, and there's a damn good reason. You have hybrid damage, both magic and physical. You have an area of effect stun that lasts several seconds. You have magic damage nuke in the early game. You can punish range auto attackers with your E. Your ultimate lets you get out of a lot of trouble very easily, because the enemies do somehow catch you. You simply ult at haste and move speed to run away. You can save your allies globally with the ultimate by hasting them. He has the scepter to save his allies and to reposition. In addition, his passive ability is completely bonkers, where he gains, I believe it's been reduced to 35 health every 2 minutes, but in even a very average duration game, he can get 600, 700 health pretty easily, especially again with a lot of games going longer nowadays. And the character already has very high health and high strength gain, so this character is just off the scales. And he also literally scales quite well because his abilities all scale with strength. So if the game goes late, Centaur's still good. So this character is, sort of the main defining character of the meta, in a sense, at least for the offlane. Most characters are defined by how well they deal with Centaur. So, if a character has high physical damage or has the ability to, reduce armor, because Centaur already has low armor, then that character, automatically, is good, something like a Templar Assassin, historically. So, Centaur is definitely the defining best character in the offlane at the moment. For honorable mentions, these are characters that don't have a cramp ton of play rate, but I think are decent. Enigma doesn't have very much play rate in competitive, but his win rate in pubs is pretty good. I'm not sure what's going on with him not being represented as much competitively. But I think, he has a combination of, he can push early and get you a gold advantage, and then he can build cheap aura items, and then of course he can jungle also, which is nice if he gets behind. And then he simply, initiates for you late game, by the way, with his E, the Midnight Pulse, and his Scepter. He has percentage health damage, which makes him scale nicely. So I think the character is very solid. I'm not sure what is lacking with his representation. He is kind of squishy, so that might have something to do with it. And his ultimate, of course, has low range, so he needs to get Blink Dagger and BKB. Timbersaw is more played as a mid, but Timbersaw is, in my estimation, solid. I think he's just better as a mid because he doesn't have CC, he instead has a lot of damage, and he already has mobility, doesn't need to get a Blink Dagger, so he kind of comes online faster, but he's solid. Beepo's just alright, it's kind of like a cheese, tanky character. I guess in offlane, they don't want him to get ganked and get behind, so that might be why he's not played as much, but I think he's totally acceptable. Abaddon always has a ridiculous win rate in pubs because of his simplicity. Abaddon is sort of like a pseudo carry / offlaner. I think in competitive he's more played as a support, like a 5 nowadays, but as an offlaner I think he could be potentially C tier or something. I mean, he doesn't have crown control, but he's sort of like a tanky damage dealer, so I do think he could have some potential. Tiny is either played typically as a carry, or he's played as a 4. He's not played as an offlane for whatever reason. I'm not really certain. I guess it's because Tiny doesn't want to build aura items. He wants to either just build a Blink Dagger if he's a support, and he just blink stuns you, and that's it, and displaces you, or he wants to be a carry and get Scepter Daedalus. So I guess maybe offlane is just kind of awkward for the character. Wraith King is obviously sort of he's been nerfed a bit, but he's a solid carry who doesn't really get much representation in offlane nowadays. I guess he doesn't get representation in the offlane because he doesn't go the skeletons. He prefers to go the damage over time facet, which it scales with attack damage, meaning that he wants to build kind of greedier. So I think that's why he's maybe not represented as much. So I'm just kind of putting him here because I'm not certain. So very long-winded, but that's my tier list for 7.0. 36B. Hopefully the second I post this, they don't make 7.36C. I was going to make videos for the first one at A, but then they posted them in rapid succession. So thank you for tuning in. I'll be making either a carrier or mid-tier list sometime here very soon. So I appreciate the views. Thank you.